Hello everybody, we are Group 6 and today we will be presenting about the linguistic landscape of Central Hanoi. These are the members of our group. And this is a table of contents. First, we will be identifying the specific research subject, and then will come the data collection, data analysis, and lastly, the overall condition of signage in the Hoàn Kiếm Old Quarter area. Now let's come to the first part, identifying specific research subject. I will introduce our research subject. Our research focuses on the linguistic landscape of the Hoàn Kiếm Lake and the Old Quarter area in Hanoi, with particular attention to the interplay of government authority, commercial appeal, and grassroots resistance. The central question guiding this research is the following. How does the hierarchy of languages such as Vietnamese and English and the hierarchy of science producers in this highly visible urban space reflect and enforce power relations, and how do they determine public participation? Now let's come to the methodology section about the data collection. First, in terms of the data sources, the site of this study consists of streets immediately surrounding Hoàn Kim Lake, as well as connecting streets in the Old Quarter area. The area was selected based on the following criteria. It represents a nexus of government authority, including government buildings and historical monuments such as global tourism, through international commerce, and local culture, which is represented by traditional streets. This combination provides a diverse and high-density sample for both official and unofficial signs. So, in total, 63 distinct signs were collected and analyzed. Now let's talk about the quantity of the data collected. Regarding data classification, signs were categorized based on their producer and primary functions. This category includes, first one is the regulatory discourse, and then the infrastructural discourse. Thirdly is the commercial discourse, and lastly, transgressive discourse. I will now present the main findings of our study, beginning with the regulatory signs. So, regulatory signs enforce traffic law, public order, and aesthetic codes. Their discourse is designed to be immediately authoritative and non-negotiable. About the producer and the discourse type. The producers of these signs are municipal departments responsible for urban planning and public works, such as the Hanoi Department of Construction, as well as related law enforcement agencies. In terms of discourse type, these are regulatory discourses, mainly traffic and prohibition signs, which represent the classic top-down discourses. They function as imperative commands dictating necessary obedience in a high-density environment where compliance is critical for safety and traffic flow. I will now turn to linguistic and semiotic choices. First, the monolingual Vietnamese functions as the dominant regulatory code. Most regulatory signage in the Old Quarter, such as traffic directions, time-restricted entry for motorbikes, parking information, fines, and administrative notices, all appears primarily or entirely in Vietnamese. This reflects Vietnamese as the official language of the state, through which legal authority, public order, and civic expectations are communicated. In terms of legal authority, Vietnamese functions as the legally authoritative version of the regulatory information. Although foreign visitors must comply with these rules, precise legal details such as condition, time, and violation categories are issued in Vietnamese because it is the language of the national law and bureaucratic enforcement. The primary target audience of these signs consists of Vietnamese-speaking local residents, shop owners, and delivery drivers who are mostly affected by daily regulations. Translating every administrative detail, including long list of exceptions or technical traffic categories, would be impractical and unnecessary. This linguistic choice also represented assertion of sovereignty. By keeping most regulatory text monolingual, the state signals that the Old Quarter is not a tourist-managed global space, but a Vietnamese-governed civic zone operating under national legal norms. At the same time, strategic English such as "please stop" or "accept" is used selectively. This functions as a form of triage translation, enabling immediate safety-related comprehension for international visitors without requiring full translation of legal or administrative details. English is mainly used for immediate action commands. Keywords like "police stop" or symbols such as the letter P for parking ensure quick safety compliance for non-Vietnamese speakers. Some universal prohibitions such as no parking, pictogram-based, no motorbike, no horn, include minimal English or rely poorly on symbols. The goal here is clarity rather than full bilingualism. In protocol and heritage zones, such as areas marked ceremonial area, English is used to prevent accidental violations by foreign visitors. From a semiotic perspective, science utilizes standardized universal symbols such as red and white circles and slashes for prohibition, or blue for enforcement. There is also heavy reliance on universal pictograms, including no entry and no parking symbols. These visual elements ensure comprehension across language barriers, which is essential for managing high volume and diverse traffic flow in the Old Quarter. In terms of placements, signs are mounted high on dedicated posts, often above commercial signs. This elevated placement reinforces their permanence and institutional authority, establishing the state's visibility and dominance over the streetscape. Finally, the prominent display of the E-Pass logo on parking signs represents a digital shift, linking the physical linguistic landscape to the virtual landscape. I will now discuss how power relations and participation are shaped. In terms of represented voices, the government is strongly represented through its language choice, standardized design, and authoritative tone, establishing Vietnamese as the dominant language of civic space. The Vietnamese-speaking local community is implicitly represented as the primary audience for daily life information, such as parking fees and specific prohibitions. In contrast, certain voices are excluded. The formal economy is explicitly silenced through prohibition signs banning street business in order to maintain the image of a civilized urban street. This shows how the state actively uses the linguistic landscape to police the economic behavior of its poorest citizens. Non-Vietnamese speakers are also excluded from understanding fine-grained regulatory details, such as exact legal penalties or complex time restrictions, and are forced to rely primarily on universal icons. Overall, these signs strictly control participation by dictating where people can park, walk, and trade, thereby defining legitimate forms of presence in the area. Finally, I will show how public participation also shapes regulatory signage. The most direct example of systemic public demand is the signage surrounding the Hoàn Kiếm walking street. Evidence for this can be seen in signs detailing time-restricted traffic bans that create the weekend pedestrian area. This policy and the signs that formalize it are a direct response to the community demand for a public space dedicated to leisure, culture, and socialization. The signs represent a top-down formalization of a successful bottom-up social movement. Regulatory signs also reflect practical negotiation through exceptions. These adjustments often emerge after public complaints or negotiation regarding real-world difficulties. For example, the sign banning cars on the walking street explicitly includes the exception ngoại lệ, except. Similarly, the traffic sign banning large vehicles over 16 seats includes the exception trừ xe buýt, xe đưa đón học sinh. These exceptions result from practical demands such as students needing transportation or local requiring vehicle access. In regulating traffic, the government had to negotiate its absolute authority in order to maintain essential public services. Lastly, resistance can be seen in the repetition of prohibition signs. The very existence of signs prohibiting sidewalk usage indicates an ongoing conflict between the state and the public. Evidence of this includes the large red sign listing multiple prohibitions against street vending, placing chairs, and littering on sidewalks. The necessity of erecting such an extensive and aggressive sign demonstrates that bottom-up activities such as informal vending and informal use of public space are widespread and persistent. The sign's continued presence is a reactive measure shaped by public refusal to comply with a regulatory ideal. Through repeated use of the linguistic landscape, the government is forced to continually reassert its authority.
In this section, I will discuss infrastructural science. First, let's look at who produces these signs. Infrastructural signs are created by municipal departments, especially those responsible for urban planning and public works. One example is the Hanoi Department of Construction. Because these signs are made by government agencies, their discourse is top-down. This means the signs follow official rules and serve public functions rather than commercial interests. They belong to the infrastructural discourse, which includes labels like street names, directional signs, and service information such as parking rules. Their main goal is to support safe and efficient movement in the city. Next, we move to the linguistic features. Most infrastructural signs are almost 100% in Vietnamese, especially the important ones. For example, street name signs such as Phố Ngô Quyên or Phố Đình Lê and detailed information like parking fees or instructions. This shows that Vietnamese is the main language for urban management and everyday navigation. However, there is a key exception, bus stop sign. This often use both Vietnamese and English. This bilingual choice helps international visitors, tourists, and foreign residents use the transport system more easily. It also signals that Hanoi is trying to present itself as a more global and accessible city. Now let's look at the semiotic or visual features. These signs use a single and standardized design, blue and white colors for information. Common icons like the P parking symbol or arrows for direction. These visual elements help people understand the signs quickly, even if they cannot read Vietnamese. In the old quarter, some signs use older style fonts or darker colors. These choices connect the signage to the historical atmosphere of the area and help preserve its identity. Another important feature is the digital shift. Parking signs now often include the e-pass logo and a QR code. This links physical signs to digital systems and show the government is pushing for more modern, efficient, and transparent public services. Now about power relations. These signs present the state as an efficient manager of the city. By providing clear and standardized information, the government controls and organizes daily mobility. At the same time, other voices, such as local businesses or residents, do not directly influence these signs. Since infrastructural sign must follow official regulations, their design is centralized and controlled. However, these signs still support public participation because they give people the official information they need to move, park, or use services. Even though the signs are top-down, public needs still shape them indirectly. For example, the decision to make bus sign bilingual comes from growing public demand for a transport system that works well for both locals and foreigners. This forces Hanoi Bus to adjust signage to be more clear and internationally friendly. Similarly, changes in bus routes or updated bus stop information often come from community feedback. When people report traffic problems or new commuter needs, the city updates the signs to reflect these changes. So, even though the government produced the signs, public participation still plays an important role in shaping how these signs evolve. To conclude, infrastructural signs in Hanoi's old quarter show a clear balance between tradition and modernization. They use Vietnamese as the main language but also include English when necessary.
Commercial signs in the Hanoi Old Quarter. These signs are not just visual markers, they are the primary interface between this historic space and the global tourist economy. They reveal how private businesses, market demand, and cultural identity interact in a unique and dynamic way. First, let's look at who produces these signs and what kinds of discourse they represent. The signs are mainly produced by private businesses like cafes, fashion stores, and hostels. In some cases, state-affiliated cultural bodies, such as museums, also produce signs. The main type of discourse here is commercial discourse. These signs aim to attract customers, encouraging them to enter and consume, using visually appealing designs and strong branding. Now, let's consider the linguistic choices. English is widely used in cafes, bars, fashion shops, spas, hostels, and other tourism services, but it is not universal. English helps identify product categories quickly, for example coffee, bar, or tailor, making it easier for international visitors to navigate. In contrast, Vietnamese dominates the Old Quarter in both quantity and function. It appears on shop names, menus, price lists, and handwritten signs. Vietnamese provides key details like prices and business information, reinforcing trust and everyday usability. So, while English signals global tourism orientation, Vietnamese signage keeps the area grounded in local identity, often using familiar colors, traditional shopfront aesthetics, and vernacular signs. Moving to semiotic choices, or how visual design conveys meaning. Businesses use stylized typography or full handwritten fonts to stand out, creating a sense of individual taste and curated experience. Color and lighting play a psychological role. Warm tones like yellow or wood evoke comfort and intimacy, while strategic lighting creates a safe and welcoming environment for tourists, especially at night. Some signs use references like 1930 to evoke the French colonial or Indochine aesthetic, a carefully chosen semiotic marker for elegance and nostalgia. Vintage imagery in sepia tones or black and white photos frames the past as a consumable aesthetic, appealing to tourists' romanticized expectations. Next, let's consider power relations and participation. Voices represented. The primary audience are global consumers and cosmopolitan locals. The signs project Hanoi as a modern, accessible hub for international tourism and commerce. Voices silenced or excluded. English-heavy signs do not fully address older or non-English speaking residents. However, Vietnamese signage remains widespread, so local voices are not erased. Exclusion occurs mainly in highly touristic clusters, while other areas remain locally legible. Influence on participation. English-dominant signs invite tourists and global consumers, while Vietnamese-only or bilingual signs maintain accessibility for local residents and everyday users. They shape comfort and belonging. Tourists engage in consumption and photo-taking, while locals navigate spaces with familiar cultural markers. In this way, commercial signs influence both activities and cultural identity performance. Finally, public participation shapes these signs in two main ways: customer demand and market adaptation. Bilingualism and English branding reflect the market's response to tourist demand. Monolingual, non-branded signs in prime tourist areas would have a high failure rate, showing that businesses constantly adapt to public spending habits. Creativity and competition. Individualized aesthetics, logos, and unique taglines help businesses stand out in a competitive landscape. Each sign is a public declaration of distinctiveness, aiming to capture attention amidst visual clutter. Bottom-up pressure for aesthetic differentiation is a powerful force in the linguistic landscape. The commercial signs of the Hanoi Old Quarter do more than display information. They mediate between local culture and global tourism, shape participation, and influence how people experience space. Both locals and tourists are affected, creating a layered, dynamic linguistic and semiotic environment.
Okay, now come to transgressive signs. Transgressive signs represent unauthorized bottom-up communication in public space, directly challenging state regulatory power and commercial ethics standards. First, I'll talk about the producer and discourse type. Who produce these signs? Individuals, informal vendors or micro-business, and citizens lacking institutional authority or funds. These are opportunistic actors operating on the fringe of the regulated economy. With a discourse type, this discourse actively ignore or challenge the state's rules governing aesthetic and spatial use. The signs are characterized by a spatial constellation being placed in unauthorized wrong space, like utility box, poles, or walls, reserved for state measures. Now come to linguistic and semiotic choice. First is the linguistic. The language is almost entirely monolingual Vietnamese. This choice is pragmatic, reflecting a limited focus on the immediate local audience who needs the decentralized service, thereby prioritizing urgency and efficiency over polished global branding. Form and material is text is often handwritten, painted, or printed on simple paper or sticker, serving as a clear index of the low capital nature of the business. Now come to about semiotic. These sites are typically low-down clustered chaotically and affixed to state infrastructure like poles, utility boxes, decaying walls. This violation of placement index their temporariness and high risk of immediate removal. Their informal appearance simply funds and load a fidelity material so products and service that contrast safely with the high quality, standardized regulatory and commercial size. This physical contrast embodies the gap between the formal and informal economies. Now comes to the power relation and participation. Which voice are represent and silence? The sites provide a visible platform for necessity and grassroots community voice. They represent service providers who are structurally excluded from the formal advertising market, but who meet critical low-cost community needs. The messages are actively targeted for removal through official cleanup circle, like silencing, by the regulatory power that continue restoring represent. However, signifies that the state's silencing effort is incomplete, serving as a visible record of ongoing structural defiance against state control over the linguistic landscape. How do these sides influence people participation? They enable local, low-resource participation in both economic, like connecting provider and customer, and the civic space, like community reminders. They establish a parallel communication and economic system. enabling low-cost transactions outside formal regulation. How might public participation have safety sides? The customer demand for convenient, affordable, and quick service, for example, often highly localized, is the essential life force of this entire category. If the public stop calling the numbers on these unauthorized sites, they would instantly disappear. The sheer volume and geographic dispersion of transgressive sites prove that the local public is actively participating and sustaining this informal, decentralized economy and communication network. And you have just heard all our content. Now with the conclusion, we'll make an overall condition of signage in the Hoàn Kiếm old quarter area. First, I'll talk about the quantity and distribution. The area exhibits a very high density of signage across all categories like regulatory, infrastructural, commercial, and transgressive. Regulatory side and infrastructural labels are consistently present and generally sufficient in a number. Commercial sites are very extremely dense, often competing visually for attention, while transgressive sites appear frequently but in fragmented clusters. Come to adequacy and clarity would be regulatory signage is generally adequate in content, but sometimes difficult to notice due to heavy visual clutter from commercial storefronts. In some streets, signs are overlapped or visually drowned by neon banners or awnings. Infrastructural signs like street name, bus information are clear and functional but can be small or placed too high for quick recognition. Convenience and the disruption would be like placement of many official signs is functional and standardized, but in tourist-heavy alleys, the abundance of commercial signs can obstruct visibility. Meanwhile, transgressive signs like sticker handwritten ads contribute to aesthetic clutter and reduce navigational legibility, creating moments of visual noise or confusion, especially for foreigners. Come to the side with the largest present. Commercial signage dominates numerically, regulatory and infrastructure sites are stable, but fewer in variety. Transgressive sites, while small, appear in large number due to their recurrence and rapid multiplication. Semiotic meaning of this situation is the sheer density and heterogeneity of sites reflect the socio-economic tension of old quarter, like where there will be a strong state represents asserting authority like regulatory and infrastructure. Intense market-driven competition will be commercial, and persistent grassroots resident and informal economy will be transgressive. This mixture demonstrates that public space in Hanoi is not monolithic but negotiated daily through layer-side production. Comparison with other areas of Hanoi will be now I will compare the Hoàn Kiếm Old Quarter area to other districts. It has more multilingual signage driven by tourism. It contains far more commercial and transgressive signage due to dense private enterprise and informal vendors. Regulatory sites are more concentrated at reflecting the government's need to manage mobility, heritage protection and order in a symbolic national space. While other districts like Ba Đinh, Đông Đa, Cầu Giấy tend to have cleaner, more uniform signage, less visual clutter, and fewer multilingual or informal sites. Thus, Hoàn Kiếm stands out as a semiotic microcosm of the competing power, like state, market, and grassroots activity, compressed into a small historic core. And that's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening. Yeah, hope you enjoy it. Maybe you not.